The frog. To pay her back for the glass eye in his beard, Mr. Twist decided he would put a frog in Mrs. Twist's back. He caught the big one down by the pond and carried it back secretly in the box. That night, when Mrs. Twist was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, Mr. Twist spilled the frog between her sheets. Then he got into his warm bed and waited for the fun to begin. Mrs. Tweed came back and climbed into her bed and put out the light. She lay there in the dark, scratching her tummy. Her tummy was itching. Dirty old hands like her only have an itchy tummy. Then all at once she felt something cold and slimy crawling over her feet. She screamed. "What's the matter with you?" Mr. Tweed said. "Help!" screamed Mrs. Tweed, bouncing about. "There's something in my bed." "I'll bet it's that giant scallywagger. I saw on the floor just now," Mr. Tweed said. "That what?" screamed Mrs. Tweed. "I tried to kill, but it's got away," Mr. Tweed said. "It's got teeth like screwdrivers." "Help!" screamed Mrs. Tweed. "Save me! It's all over my feet." "It'll bite off your toes," said Mr. Tweed. Mrs. Tweed fainted. Mr. Tweed got out of bed and fetched a jug of cold water. He poured the water over Mrs. Tweed's hand to revolting her. The frog crawled up from under the sheet and got near the water. It started jumping about on the pillows. Frogs love water. This one was having a good time. When Mrs. Tweed came to, the frog just jumped onto her face. "This is not a nice thing to happen to anyone in bed at night," she screamed again. "By golly, it is a giant scallywagger," Mr. Tweed said. It'll bite off your nose." Mrs. Tweed leapt out of bed and flew downstairs and snapped the night on the sofa. The frogs went to sleep on her pillows. The warm spaghetti. The next day, to pay Mr. Tweed's back for the frog's trick, Mrs. Tweed sneaked out into the garden and dug up some worms. She chose big long ones and put them in a tin and carried the tin back to the house under her apron. At 1 o'clock she cooked spaghetti for lunch, and she mixed the worm in with the spaghetti, but only on her husband's plate. The worm didn't show because everything was covered with tomato sauce and sprinkled with cheese. "Hey, my spaghetti's moving," cried Mr. Tweed, poking around in with his fork. "It's a new kind," Mrs. Tweed said, taking a mouthful from her one plate, which of course has no worm. "It's called squeezy spaghetti. It is delicious. Eat it up while it's nice and hot." Mr. Tweed started eating, twisting and long tomato cover stinging around his fork and shoveling them into his mouth. Soon there were tomato sauce all over his hairy chin. "It is not as good as the ordinary kind," he said, taking with his mouth full. "It is too squishy." "I found it very tasty," Mrs. Tweed said. She was watching it from the other end of the table. It gave her great pleasure to watch him eating a worm. "I found it rather bitter," Mr. Tweed said. It's got a delicious bitter flavor. Buy the other kind next time." Mrs. Tweed waited until Mr. Tweed had eaten the whole plateful. Then she said, You want to know why your spaghetti was squishy? Mr. Twit wiped the tomato sauce from his beard with the corner of the tablecloth. Why, he said, and why it had no nasty bitter taste. Why, he said, because it was warm, cried Mrs. Twits, clapping her hands and stamping her feet on the floor and rocking with hammer laughing.